Hey, Credera family, welcome, and thanks for joining us for this panel today, where we'll be talking about race, racism, anti-racism, and really allyship and kind of diversity and inclusion in general across the board here. We've got three great panelists that I'm excited to introduce in just a minute, and they're going to share their experience and some of their story with us today. The purpose of this really is so that we can all learn, become more educated on certain important topics that are extremely relevant and topical with what's going on the last 11 or so days in the United States, but more broadly is a theme that's been around for too long, and become more educated on that and really ultimately better understand each other so that we can be better teammates, better colleagues, better friends, and ultimately get to some better outcomes eventually as a society. And this is just our small step in that direction. So the way that we'll do this is we've got a series of different questions that we'll go through for the first 40 minutes or so, and I'll kind of direct traffic and point questions to each of our different panelists. Throughout, just like we have during our fireside chats, you can enter your questions in Q&A, and then Alex Moore will be helping to kind of curate and moderate those and get me a few of those that we can ask the panelists at the end for the last 15 or 20 minutes. So that's sort of the playbook for the day. I want to quickly thank and introduce our panelists, and Ryan's going to pan the camera over to each of them as I do, so that you can put a name with a face and they can give a wave. So I'll start with Craig Coffey. Craig is the founder and president of Way Maker Leadership, where he's an executive coaching firm. And prior to starting this firm, he has held senior executive marketing and general management roles in a number of different Fortune 100 companies, including Kraft, Pizza Hut, PepsiCo, Nokia, and Wells Fargo. And so really impressive career and life, and super excited for him to share his experience with us. Next up, Richard Reid. Richard is the vice president of business development at Freeman, where he comes from a 30-year background of technology and sales and business development, and now leads this business unit at Freeman. We've got a chance to meet meet Richard years ago when Freeman was a client and worked together. And Craig and Richard are both part of our strategic forums, our executive forums, as well as how we've stayed connected with them recently. So Richard, thank you for volunteering your time here. And then last but not least, and most of you all know Nickoria Johnson is a principal at Credera in the management consulting practice. And prior to her time at Credera, has held leadership roles at a number of different retail and financial services and other consulting companies over the years in her career. And so again, just want to extend an extremely warm thank you for these three, and welcome for these three to really jump into a topic that's at times hard to talk about, but it's better for all of us if we'll lean in a bit on this, learn from each other, keep an open mind, and really work to develop greater empathy for each other. And that's the purpose again of today. So I want to start off just with asking each of our panelists, and Nickoria, I'd ask that you go first on this one, but maybe share with the group a bit about just why was it important for you to be a part of this panel, and why did you say yes when we asked you?
All right, I'm up first. I was thinking I would be last. So I just first of all want to say thank you for the opportunity just to join the call and to remove my mask a little bit, to talk about the things we normally don't get a chance to talk about with each other, in the break room, and especially not now while we're virtual. Most of you guys know me, but don't know much about my history, my background, my walk. So I'm excited to share some things, and in light of everything, just hopefully walk away with some commonality. So thanks so much for having me.
Great, thank you, Nickoria. Excited to hear about that. Richard, how about you?
Yeah, I'd like to echo exactly what Nickoria said with regard to thank you for having me here to share my journey with you on the one front. But in this unfortunate day right now, where we see a lot of protests going on, and we know that a lot of it is about having a dialogue. I appreciate you all offering the opportunity to have a dialogue and have a constructive conversation. So I think that's what's most important. And me, I can't be more prouder of having the opportunity to engage in that dialogue with you. So thank you, Justin.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And then Craig?
Yeah, again, thank you. As the other panelists have said, it's a privilege and honor to be a part of this conversation and be a part of your organization for the next hour. I just think these are such turbulent times. We can all gain something from the discussion. And I think typically we hear people say, we should talk to one another. And, my twist on that should be, we should be listening to one another. So as much as we may be talking as panelists, I'm looking forward to the Q&A piece as well to hear what's on the team's mind. And I'm going to learn as much from this collection of people, Richard and Nickoria, and the questions that people ask. I'll probably learn as much as I offer. So I'm excited about it. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Craig. And yeah, and to that same point, this email invite is called Credera Listens. That's exactly our intent. It's just to listen, really try to, develop a better understanding of different people and their backgrounds that are unique. This next question, I'm going to point to Richard first, and then Nickoria second. So, Richard, at what age were you first taught about race in the culture?
It's a great question I've been pondering, and my background is we've all got our interesting backgrounds. Mine is that I'm an Army brat, and so I grew up in a largely multicultural environment, mostly because of the military. I would say, for lack of a better way of saying it, it's more balanced, if you will, being in the military. But also growing up in Germany, I found that post World War II Germany, a lot of Germans were going out of their way to show acceptance and understanding of other cultures, to show that they weren't all Nazis, for example, and so a lot of my youth was spent in an environment where it was more of a shock to my system when I came back to the States and had to be taught about race and cultural differences. Isn't that amazing, though, that that when I lived out of the country, I didn't have to be exposed to it as much as I did when I was younger. So I think that makes my background just a little bit different than probably some others have had.
Yeah, really interesting. Sorry, I'm getting a little feedback on my end. I don't know if there's anything to do, but just very interesting how, being in another country, and specifically a country that had such a problem, made it where they were more sensitive and more aware in that way. Nickoria, how about you? What's your story with when you were first exposed to race?
Yeah, so I guess from the time I can remember, good or bad, my grandparents were from Louisiana. They moved up and started a family very young. They didn't have much. My mom was a teenage mother, and so from the beginning of time, it was always, hey, don't act up in school because they'll see you first. Or going to a birthday party, oh, she can't get in the pool because she'll make it dirty. Little things like that happen to you as a child, it sticks with you and it makes you feel different and isolated. So race has been a conversation for me since before I can remember, good or bad. And I've learned a lot from it. A lot of folks get that exposure and don't grow up to be very open and inclusive, but fortunately, I've had a chance to kind of create my own path. So,
yeah, thank you for sharing that. You described it as little things, but they don't sound all that little, and I'm sure they were impactful more than little. But thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
For the next topic, I wanted to have Craig go first, and then Nickoria as well to jump in on this one. But Craig, can you describe a time when you felt isolated because of your ethnicity?
Yeah, I would probably go back to what would be 7th grade for me. And I'm an Army brat also. And my parents were very big fans of education. We're going to get education. So they purposefully, when he got out of the military, moved to neighborhoods that were predominantly white so we could get good educations. And we happened to move to a town where we were only the second Black family in an entire town of 25,000 people. So clearly, I felt like I didn't necessarily fit in just, from a visual perspective to a lot of my peers. But then the other thing that complicated it was this was a time when they actually had voluntary busing. This is in the Northeast. They actually had voluntary busing where there were kids from the inner city Boston area that were coming out to the suburb that we happened to live in. And I found myself in this really isolated place of I didn't necessarily fit into the town I lived in because I was one of two Black families in this kind of all white community. But for those African American kids that were being bussed out, I was not Black enough for them. So when there was ever any kind of a conflict, as teenage kids will have, it was sort of like, where did I line up and what side was I on? I didn't necessarily fit in the town, and I didn't necessarily fit with my peer group that came from the inner city. And I think it taught me two things. Number one, it gave me a passion around this notion of diversity and inclusion, although I wouldn't have known it was called that at 13 years old. But it also made me realize that racism and prejudice can happen even amongst your own race. I thought it was interesting that somehow, I somehow wasn't Black enough. And I think we've even heard it in the political landscape. I think when Kamala Harris first started running for the Democratic office, people were asking that question. And it's just an odd thing, but it's a real thing that does happen. It's not just a Black-white thing. It can also be within individual races as well. So that's one story that sticks out with me that I probably carried most of my life.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. Nickoria, how about your experience with that?
Yeah, so growing up, originally I was going to high school that was pretty blended, but we started having gang-related violence, unfortunately. My mother decided to pack us up and move us to Naperville, and it was a town that was very unbalanced ethnically. So I was one of 6 out of almost a 600 graduating class, one of 6 African Americans out of that 600 group, to give you the magnitude. Always felt excluded, and they actually had racial tensions in the town got a little high. We had what we called a little mini race riot in high school. And so us Black students had gotten out of a student union meeting, and somehow doors got shut in this locker area and people just started fighting. Like, you're in high school. I'm just trying to get my education. So definitely felt isolated in that environment. But throughout my career, and again, I'm a woman and I'm African American, so I can't really tell sometimes what it is. But there were a lot. I was never involved in the lunch clubs, folks that were going to lunch all the time together. I in particular learned how to play golf so that I could go out on the golf course and where decisions were made. But at my other company, it was very much, even if I was a peer to these folks that were, white males, I was not included on so many occasions that I did have to go to HR and talk about it. I couldn't do my job effectively.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Yep.
Sure.
Nickoria, this next question is uniquely for you. You brought up being Black and a woman. Would love to hear, just to share, like, what is that experience like, and what has been specifically your experience being a Black woman?
Yeah. So first of all, being a mother in this society right now is a little bit scary. I'm a mom to some beautiful Black boys, and every time they go out the door, I'm nervous. And I have a friend of mine whose son plays for Allen. He's a starter on the football team, and they've decided not to allow him to go jogging in the neighborhood anymore because of fear and of what may happen to him. So it's a sad time being a Black mom. But overall, there's this whole stereotype about an angry Black woman in society. And if you guys go and Google it, and that's the unfortunate fact of the matter, if you Google it, you'll see a whole bunch of things come up on the background of the stereotype. And what it creates is kind of this, we're not supposed to push back or be aggressive or share our opinions loudly or boldly, because then we'll be typecast into that particular stereotype that you really don't want to be associated with. So I was taught to go definitely above and beyond to make sure people felt comfortable with me, and to, even kind of suppress some of my true thoughts and opinions. That what that means in the workplace sometimes is that, if I do speak up about something, it often got written up in my review that I was being hyper emotional or that I was being too aggressive, when I personally felt like it had come from someone with a different face or race, that it would have been very widely accepted. So those are two things that I can really call out are different for me as an African American woman.
Yeah, thank you. you brought up some things there that segue nicely into the next topic, which is really around, biases and specifically unconscious bias. But I think there's sometimes fine line between conscious and unconscious on some of those things. But for each of you, and Richard, we'll start with you, but can you describe some of the unconscious bias that you've experienced in your career or in life, wherever you want to go with that question?
Sure, Justin. Thank you. It's interesting as I've pondered, some of my own personal history in kind of preparation for the things we might have discussed today. I think back to one of the constants in my life, as I've like most of you have gone through and had an opportunity to grow in my career since graduating from college and go from job to job, and I was saddened upon that reflection to see that in every single instance when I've interviewed for a new role, I've never been offered the role that was published or listed. Whenever a company was excited to hire me, they always had a reason for why they were bringing me in at the level below with this. And this is to your point. I don't know if it's conscious or unconscious, Justin, but it was always, you can come in and prove yourself, and you'll be at that next level in no time. And so the consideration around bias for me was, well, does that happen to everybody, or does it happen to just some of us? And I'll give you a very specific example of where I realized, and one of my most recent changes for a job I did not take was that I think it just happens to some of us. And I'll tell you what happened is because when I worked for the Staubach company in late 2000s before they were sold. And a lot of us weren't able to go to the company that it was sold to, so we found ourselves looking for new employment. I won't. This commercial real estate firm shall remain nameless, but my boss at the time, who was an executive vice president, and my peers, we were all vice presidents in the company. We were offered employment with this new commercial real estate firm. My boss was offered a peer that was commensurate with his level. My peers were offered, who are white peers and a white supervisor. My peers were offered positions that were commensurate with their level as vice presidents. I was offered an entry-level business analyst role with the company. And when I asked why I was being offered a business analyst role when I knew that all of my peers were coming in at vice presidential levels, I was told that it was because they were a much larger company that I was going to, and the company I was coming from was smaller. It was they were a really large company, billions of dollars. The company I was coming from was less than $1 billion. And so that is the unconscious bias of that, because I didn't perform well in my interview, but why did they still extend me the offer? And I was thinking, I blame Craig for becoming a somewhat unconscious or conscious bias, because I look at it as if I see people that look like me that can rise to the C-suite, then I should be able to rise to the C-suite. There must be something that I'm doing. So, but there causes that to be that need or requirement to look at is that conscious bias or unconscious bias, to your point.
Yeah. No, thank you, Richard, for sharing that. And well, Craig, Richard threw it over to you, so we'll go to you next. Hear your story of bias.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is I think we're all guilty of unconscious bias. I mean, there are things that I catch myself on. I see something, I hear something, and I draw a conclusion about something that I've made up a story in my mind about it that I shouldn't make up the story about, but I've created some whole backstory to something, and I know nothing about what just happened. It's just an observation. So I don't want you to think any of us are, not wrapped up in that. I think just as human beings, we are, in that space of conscious and unconscious bias. I think for me, it's a little bit of what Nickoria talked about. I've sat in my fair share of talent management discussions for the last 30 plus years in corporate America. And this is a gender example. I sat and watched a leader evaluate, or us as leaders evaluate, two people. And Rachel was described as too aggressive. And Rachel was described as having sharp elbows. And then Perry, when Perry was talked about as being ambitious instead of aggressive, and was talked about as being direct and candid versus the sharp elbow piece. And I remember saying it in a meeting. I said, "Hey, Rachel and Perry, we just described completely different adjectives, and somehow Perry was being up for the promotion, and Rachel was not. These are fictitious names, by the way." So I try to call it out, and we can come back to this topic later on what are the things we can all do, but I tried to call it out because I just thought it was wrong. And then I think as it relates to me, I had a really great mentor early on in my career, and he pulled me aside because he thought I was capable of doing the job. And he told me he was getting pushback because the things people were telling him about me was, oh, you know what? Do we really want to take a chance on Craig in that role? Because it's a bigger role for him than he's accustomed to having. So for some reason, for Craig, it was taking a chance on me. But for other people, it was a great stretch assignment. And that was this language again between it's a chance if we go with Craig, but it's a great stretch assignment for this person. And that's just one of those examples of, where that unconscious bias comes in some way, shape, or form that I think, to Richard's point, can affect somebody's career, their earning potential, and all of these other kinds of things. So,
yeah, those are two really good examples. One of gender and then one of color. But both ways. You're right. It comes across quite subtly, but it's impactful in a big way. Negative. Nickoria, how about you? Anything you'd like to share on the topic of bias?
Well, I think I've shared a little bit, but it comes down to even in the workplace when you are recruiting, and I'm sure all of our talent acquisition people will understand this, but get a resume that comes across with a name at the top. And I've noticed as an African-American person, someone that probably has an African-American name come across my desk. I think about it as an African-American woman, that they're different than the other resumes that I'm looking at. But instead of putting it to the side, I dive in a little bit deeper because I'm curious, right? But how many times does that happen where you see a name, whether it's a Black name, an Indian name, a, whatever name, and your mind can trigger that just unconscious bias to make you think, oh, I don't even want to read anymore. And so part of understanding unconscious bias, and I'm looking forward to helping with the training, is really catching yourself in those moments and being able to do something about them before you do something against what is the right thing.
That's really good. And to that point, at Credera, in our career evaluation process, a couple of years ago, we started passing around a one-pager of common biases to everyone, just as a quick reminder before we started having the discussion of what we're all predisposed or potentially predisposed to have from a bias standpoint. Because if you're more aware of it, it's easier to then combat it, in that moment when you have to fight that little initial trigger or reaction or response. So that's a good one. Okay, we're going to step into this next section is really all around camaraderie and allyship. So we'll start to talk more here about, what can people who are not of color do to help and play our part there. And so we'd love to just, first topic here, and we'll start with Richard and then Nickoria. How would you suggest to a non-person of color engage with in terms of just having these conversations? Is there a quote unquote right way? Is there, when we're getting into these topics that are a bit sensitive in our society, how do you recommend that they lean into those? And Richard, we'll start with you and then go to Nickoria.
Okay, great question. I guess I have to draw from my own personal experience and how I dive into it. I've got a really good friend who I felt like he helped me kind of solidify how I engage in that sort of developing that allyship, if you will. And just to tell you a quick story, we were working together, didn't know him from anyone else. We were two consultants working, and we were on our way to a customer pitch, and he decided he was going to drive that day. And we get in his car. It's in August, and we get a mile down the road, and his air conditioning's not working. And I say, Paul, what's up with your air conditioning? I said, why isn't your air conditioning working? And he says, he looks over at me deadpan. He says, why are you complaining about the air conditioning? Is it because I'm Polish? and I said, I don't know. I said, do Polish people have something against air conditioning? But I knew it. When I reflected on it, I knew what he was doing, and it's something I've loved that he did. Is he opened the door to talk about who he was as a person. And I think that it's incumbent upon us to always be willing to welcome people into our race and our culture and have the conversation. I find that I know that some people are more willing than others to step through the door, but I find that if I have to be the one to open the door and welcome them in to the conversation. So I tend, like Paul, my friend Paul, and we're great friends to this day. I tend to be like him, where I use humor to welcome them in the door. It doesn't mean that I don't take it seriously, but I find that if I can show you that I'm comfortable with my race and my culture, and I'm totally comfortable talking about it, hopefully you're willing to come in the door and do the same.
It's really good. Nickoria, from your experience, any advice that you'd give?
Uh-oh, I think I clicked something bad here. All right, there we go.
Yeah,
yes, so I think that I saw an interesting statistic, and I bring it up only because I saw it over and over again. And this may not apply to everyone, but overall, approximately 75% of white Americans only have white friends. And so get some diversity in your life. Become friends with other people. I've got friends from all different walks of life that I love and value, but the only way that I really think you get authentic is if you really have those friends in your life and you're walking with them through their life situations, seeing the commonalities, and when different things happen, you notice the differences and you're able to talk to them because you have those deep relationships. So that's what I would say, number one. And then number two, just be a great listener. If you want to have the conversations, just listen and let those things happen organically. So those are my two things.
It's really good. Thank you. For the next topic, I wanted to go to, can you speak a bit to the importance of mentors or allies for minorities, and an example of specifically kind of allyship or mentorship that was applied? We heard one story earlier, but Nickoria, we'll come right back to you here. So you'll start us off, and then we'll go to Richard and Craig. But we'd love to hear just, examples of strong allyship that we can help pattern after.
Sure. So going kind of tying to what Richard was saying, there aren't a lot of African-American C-level people that you can look up to model your career after and go and build relationship with. So I have worked for 95% white males that have absolutely been my partners, my allies. I've learned from them, but they were particular about, for whatever reason, getting to know me and really trusting and believing in me. So I've had some really great experiences, and I guess they just came around and said, hey, she's talented, let's give her a chance. But those things actually worked out really well. And to this date, I know I can go to them for anything I need. And the other thing is, I've had people notice things that are not quite right in how I've been treated, and they've actually spoken up on behalf of me. And good or bad, in society today, white voices sometimes can speak a little louder in certain situations, especially outside of the workplace and what we're seeing right now. And I appreciate that. I appreciate someone coming alongside me and, helping my voice to be heard where it isn't, even though it should be. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Richard, how about you? Good experiences from,
Yeah, it's funny, Nickoria. My experiences are very similar to yours in that I've just not been, in positions where, like I said, there have been people of color in many leadership roles that I could have that mentorship from. My best experience with someone who transitioned me, or got me thinking about moving from, say, becoming a programmer or a project manager, moving into management and leading people, was someone who appreciated me for my skills and my outlook and my my capabilities. One of the things it sounds crazy to say, but one of the things I appreciate the most is that I felt like he never saw me for, he didn't want to develop me because I was a young black man who needed to be developed. He saw someone who had skills that were worth developing. And I appreciate that to this day. He's still someone I count as someone I can pick up the phone and call, because I think, he sees me for who I am. I can't recall any conversation we've ever had about our individual race or culture, for example, but I know he values me as a fellow human being and someone who can do the job, right? And so I would say that's the way I try to pay it forward when I look at talent and when I look at mentoring others. I see them for who they are, where they're at, and where they want to get to, and that's where we start. So
yeah, that's great. Absolutely. Craig, anything you'd like to add about allyship?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think similar to the other panelists, I had a really great mentor in my 30s who I think similar to Richard, I'll put a different twist on what he did. He was twice my age, so he was in his 60s, so older white male, and I'll use an expression that you hear more and more. He owned his privilege. He recognized that. He recognized that the scales were imbalanced, and he felt like he was in a position where he could open a door that I could not open by myself. He recognized he had a voice in a room, to Nickoria's point, that was more powerful than any voice I could bring because I was not in the room. So when he decided to be my mentor, he did two things for me that were amazing. One, he brought me to meetings. He let me shadow him. So he would come by my cubicle and say, hey, I'm going to this meeting. It's a bunch of senior people. You're going to come with me. You're going to sit like on the side. You're not going to sit at the big table. And then afterwards, we'll talk about what you saw, what you heard, et cetera, et cetera. And number one, the fact that he brought me to the meeting, I got a chance to see how very senior people thought, who aligned with who in meetings, who had good points of view, who seemed to always get the funding, and the other person who didn't get the funding. And then as we walked back, he wanted to hear my observations. And he did that several times. And then eventually he brought me to a meeting and said, I went to go take my place along the wall. He's like, no, come sit next to me. And then somebody asked, like, hey, what's he doing here? And he was like, don't worry why he's here. He's here with me. So he actually was a great advocate for me. But I think this notion of owning privilege is an important point because, and his name is Alan. He's since passed away, but, Alan deserved to be where he was. It wasn't like life was given to him. He worked hard. He earned his position, but he also recognized his position was a position where he could help other people and he could kick down doors and he could make a difference. And the mere fact that he was doing some of those things actually disrupted the very privilege that he was a beneficiary of, to use it for other people. So that's the way I would talk about some of this mentorship. And, this notion of if you're in a position where you can actually help others and you don't, there's something wrong about that. We all have some form of privilege. And, myself as an African-American male, I should be trying to reach back and help other people. And if I'm not, then there's something wrong that I'm doing. So.
Yeah, it's great. I love that phrase of owned his privilege. That's an important and powerful concept there. Last question, kind of prepared questions, and then we'll go to some. We're getting some coming in from the audience that we'll leave some time for, but we'll go Richard first and then Craig second. How would you encourage people to get involved in promoting inclusivity and the celebration of diversity? Is there anything we haven't talked about yet that you would encourage in terms of how to get involved with that?
It's a great question. I don't know if any of you use the Nextdoor app as part of your community. You nod, yes. Okay, yeah. So it's interesting. A couple in their 50s posted a question that said they would love to go out to the out to the protests and lend their voice. They mentioned they were in their 50s, which I was a bit appalled. They said that they were, because they were in their 50s, they were worried about being too old. And I said, you can never be too old, obviously, right? But it was they were genuinely concerned about their safety and, because they've been seeing the rioting and everything. And the community really came together and said, you know what, there's nothing to be scared of. The protests that I've been to have been safe. Bring a water bottle. It's hot out there. It's a lot of camaraderie. There was one quote though that I found interesting, and it was specifically where they said there was a great sense of solidarity and progress. And I remember thinking, I was like, how much progress can you have in 10 days? And so while I was thankful I was thankful and glad to see that they were having the dialogue, this this tension that we're feeling is not resolvable in 10 days. So to your question, Justin, it's gotta be, you got to keep that light on. You got to keep going back to the well. We've got to keep the conversation going. And so however that looks, I think we owe it to ourselves to keep the dialogue and truly make progress, because what happens is, we get this flash and then we have this response, and then we start over again. It quells down. Everybody loses that energy, and then and then something unfortunately happens again to incite it, and then we start all over again. So I just am hopeful that we can create, like with conversations like this, where it's not just a one-time thing, where we're going back and we're having a continuing conversation, and we invite everyone to contribute to it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally share that sentiment. I have been encouraged by like the initial response from corporate America and general society, but concerned that it'll be just a moment, and then everyone forgets about it and it becomes backburnered again, and we don't continue to make good progress on something this important. Craig, anything you'd like to add in terms of how people should get involved?
Yeah, I'll try and tick through three things quickly. I think one, we should all just kind of identify, regardless of what our race or ethnicity happens to be, we should just identify that diversity is a huge, there's a huge definition attached to that. That is sexual orientation, racial, ethnic, that's religious beliefs. That could even be where you are geographically. That could be your tenure in a company. If you're a 20-year veteran and somebody else is a 2-year veteran, there's a diversity gap there. So I think, number one, we should just understand when we talk about diversity, it's not just color, it's a very broad definition. I think the second thing that's important is for people to understand what diversity they bring to the table, because you can identify your own kind of beliefs and personal characteristics that make you diverse, and then maybe share that with somebody else who has their own diverse definition. So I think just us understanding how we contribute to the diversity definition would be important. And then the third thing is, I think measurement really matters. I've worked for large companies that did it well. I've worked for companies that did not do it well. But, measuring this notion of diverse recruitment, what was diverse employee engagement like? What was diverse advancement like? What was diverse retention like? Those are just 4 examples. There's probably 4 more that we can all come up with. And be transparent about what you're measuring, and transparent, like, as you share it, and when there's a fall backwards, be transparent about that. I think without some form of measurement, it's lost. I'm using today as an example. I think, and I still haven't figured this out yet, I actually think unemployment went down today, if I'm not mistaken. But if you look at African-American unemployment, it's still double digit, like it's still twice what the average is. So the numbers matter, because everybody's like, hey, we're only at 13.3%, but for African-American, it's 25 plus. So I just think the numbers matter, and we should all kind of want to dig into the numbers to see, are we really making progress for everybody, or are we making progress for some?
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so we're going to go to some questions from the audience. What I'll ask here, I'll read the question, and if we just have maybe one of our panelists, we'll do a quick volunteer if something triggers for you. We'll have one of you answer each of these, that way we can get through. It looks like I've got 5 or so of these teed up. So first one segues from something we were just talking about a minute ago. This moment in history comes with so much momentum that can lead to such a great positive change. As we move out of the heat of the protests, riots, looting, general violence, how do we best move back into normal life? It often feels selfish or privileged to start going back to any semblance of normal. How do you recommend navigating that process? Any takers on that one?
I'll take that one. So again, this is a point in time, yes. But to make it last, you really have to start being all in with your friends, being diverse in terms of what you select to watch, for example, seeking to understand through reading and research what is really happening and how those things impact the people around you, as well as yourself. Something as simple as, have you read any of the books that are out there on African American history or published by African American leaders? can you go in and read those as a part of your normal book club list together with some of your friends that might not normally think of that? It's all about pushing through, being comfortable, going that next layer up just in every walk of your life every day. And if you can do that, then I think that'll keep things at the top of the conversation versus pushing down to the bottom all the time. So making it part of your daily walk.
I really like that. And the general encouragement just to increase the diversity in our lives. Basically that can be your friends that you associated with, what you're reading, what you're watching, what you're eating. All those things matter in terms of, for us and our children and the next generation. They come up with a very, very different point of view if they're exposed to that.
Hey, Justin, and I'd like to add to that quickly. Nickoria, you're so right. As I was saying, I grew up as an Army brat, predominantly in Europe, and so I tended to go to predominantly white schools. It wasn't until I got to college at Prairie View, and I was exposed to Black authors, Black artists, and I was like, here I am as a Black man who wasn't even exposed to my own cultural diversity. So if I needed that exposure, then we can all, there's opportunity for us all to learn that, right? Absolutely. And reach out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Next question here. Do any of you feel weight of having to, quote unquote, represent your race? And how has that applied itself in your life or in your career? And how have you combated that?
Yeah, I'll try and take this one. I want to say yes, but I try not to be just trapped in my race. So without a doubt, I'm very conscious of how I show up, and as I do mentoring and coaching with people, I try to make sure that they're very aware of how they show up to kind of mitigate negative stereotypes and all these other kinds of things. But at the same time, we are more than a race. And, I want people to evaluate me for how good I am at my job. Going back to that story I told about when I was in middle school and I was one of two Black families, I'll tell you what changed the entire environment for me was sports. Because, we moved to this town. I was one of two, Black families. And, I signed up and played basketball. I played football. I ran track. And all of a sudden, it wasn't about the color of my skin. It was like, it was the performance on whatever the playing field happened to be that actually helped bridge gaps. And at the end of the day, I try to be performance oriented. And it's not, well, hey, he's pretty good or he's pretty smart or he's pretty strategic for a Black guy. It's he's pretty strategic, period. And if I can do that, then that's great. And oh, by the way, he happens to be African American. Let that be the trailer. But I don't want that to be the lead. I would rather that be the trailer. So there is this element of, I know it's the first thing people see when I walk in a room, but I don't want it to be the last thing they think after they've met me.
Really good. Really good. Next question we'll go to here says, really appreciate all the panelists' contribution. What is the one thing you wish was different in the workplace? This is a choose your own adventure story question here. You can go pretty much anywhere.
I'll start on that one. More than anything, I wish it was different for my children. It's sad that some of the things that we've experienced as people of color growing up, my children have experienced the same thing. And I'll tell you quickly. I have one quick story that makes me simultaneously proud to Craig's point of the children that I've raised, but it's also heartbreaking. My son is a gifted chef and was in culinary school growing up. And had an opportunity to work in a restaurant, neighborhood restaurant, and was there working, doing his job, kitchen help, but a little bit of cooking. And then a couple of weeks later, he had a white classmate get hired to do the exact same job for $2 more an hour. And my son quit on the spot. That's what made me proud. He had enough self-worth to say, I'm out of here. And they actually called him back and said, hey, this other guy is not that great. He's not working out. Can you come back? He's like, no, I'm good. So it's simultaneously heartbreaking and sad, but that's I know in the workplace today, that's the one thing that is disheartening because it feels like not a lot has changed.
Yeah. And I'll add to that if you don't mind. In the workplace, I think Craig hit the nail on the head. I want to walk into the room and not be known as the Black girl or the African American, leader, I also don't want to be the only one, right? I want, as you mentioned, Richard, when my kids get to the place that I am, for them to be surrounded with people of all walks of life, of different colors, want them to have that C-suite role model that they can look at and perhaps build a mentorship with, just because everyone wants to fit in. Everyone wants to feel like their normal is everyone else's normal. And just to be able to feel good at a company, and that's one thing I will say about Credera, is it's nice to walk around the halls and see women, to see people and faces that look like me. We just need to do a little bit better job to make sure we're getting higher level role models in place so that as people grow up in their careers, they have the Craigs to look up to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's great. Something that tied into what you both brought up, and in terms of your children, so this question says, no bias is often formed at very young age. As a parent of young children, I'd like to know if you recommend your recommendations for ways to engage my children in the conversation in a healthy way. How would you encourage my white children to approach the topic of children of color?
I guess I'll take that again. So I would say from a very, very young age, just make sure they're in places where they can get exposure to people. Our neighborhoods sometimes are very, not intentionally, quote, segregated, but, or your churches or wherever you are, just make it intentional that they get some exposure to other folks. And kids are amazing. I don't know if you've seen the video of, well, probably several videos of just, 3-year-olds, black, white, whatever, just running at each other, loving on each other. And they don't see it at that age. Again, they're kind of taught through society and the things that they see, on TV, et cetera. So, and as your kids have questions, make sure that you're there to support them through what that looks like. And then, just invite, again, have that diverse circle of friends.
I would, if I could add one thing to this, I think watching the news every day, it's a teachable moment. I think there's nothing more valuable, and I did this when our kids were younger. They're now in their 20s, but it's like you see something that happens in the headlines. Like, let's take the demonstrations that are going on right now. If I think about the demonstrations that I saw on old news footage, during the civil rights movement, it was probably 90%, 95% African American and 5% Caucasian. This is a very eclectic collection of people who are protesting, who are doing the peaceful demonstrations. And I think that's great to be able to point to your kids and say, what do you see? And look at the mix of people that are there. And this is touching and resonating with everybody. Why do you think that is? And just taking a headline, taking a news story, and just having a conversation of what do you think's going on? Or what's your view of that? Or what did you see? Cosmetically, what did you see? Is a great opportunity every single day to be able to have a conversation. Another example, I'm not getting political at all, but if you see the administration and they're around the table, you don't really see many people of color. So you talk about, and you can flip through any annual report in a company and you kind of look at the board of directors and you go, oh, wow, it's a bunch of older white males. There's nobody there that mirrors the community that this corporation serves. And I think all of that is educational of, hey, what do you see? Because you learn by seeing often, you learn by hearing, and just having that conversation with just everyday news articles, I think can be really helpful for kids because it's real.
Yep, absolutely. That's great. On that topic of learning, there was a question that came in about, do you all have any books or podcasts or anything like that you would recommend that might help, people who are not of color to be exposed to more, whether it be culture or history? Any particular recommendations there?
I have someone that I've followed for years and years. Many of you may have heard of Jane Elliott. She's the anti-racism activist, and she's the one who did the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment. But oh my gosh, that woman she has a way of just saying powerfully and succinctly the message we need to listen to. And so even to your point, just if you're not a reader and you just want to watch, go, just put in Jane Elliott and YouTube. there's one very poignant one, for example, where she asked, she has a question for the members of her audience who are white. She says, if you would be happy to be treated the way society treats our black citizens, please stand up, right? And no one stands up. Mm-hmm. And then she says, maybe you didn't understand the question. So she asks it again, because she wants people to feel it. That's the thing I think I like about her. She wants you to own it and feel it. And so I think she's a great resource if you really want to understand from a person to the way Craig said it, someone who owns kind of their privilege, but says, I'm not going to stand by and just let it be the norm. So that's one I would suggest that you spend some time with.
That's a great one. Yeah, I shared this with our company on Monday, but I had a moment over the weekend where I was talking to a black friend who shared a story about how he was he had, with all everything that's going on right now, he had to have a conversation with his 16-year-old son about what to do if he gets pulled over by the police to try to keep him as safe as possible. And it was really impactful on me because, speaking of privilege, like it made me very aware immediately of my privilege, because that's never even crossed my mind to have that same conversation or a similar conversation with my 15-year-old son, just because it is a different privilege. And so I think to the point that Jane is making there, it's sometimes just being aware of some of those things and personalizing it a bit can be helpful to help us then engage more. Okay, last topic for everyone, and then we'll wrap up what I think has been an outstanding panel conversation. But this one is very practical and timely. But how do you all recommend, for people who are not of color, to reach out to their friends or coworkers who are Black or African American in this time? If they're like the heart behind the question is kind of like, hey, I'm concerned, and I want to reach out to this person, but I'm also a little apprehensive of how they'll react or how I should phrase it or what should I say and how will they feel. It's, they didn't put all those words in the question. I'm elaborating, but how would you all respond to that in terms of what do you recommend very practically when we're reaching out?
I'll start. I'll start simply because I've had some white friends reach out, and the first thing, it's kind of going back to what I said. I like to think that if you know me, I'm accessible. You can talk to me about anything, but you may not know, because now this may be an uncomfortable situation or uncomfortable conversation. I had a friend / colleague call, and he called me early in the morning. It was funny because I was just waking up, but he said it had been on his heart. He had been wanting to reach out, but he had tried to reach out to another Black friend, and the conversation didn't go very well. But he had the courage to pick up the phone and call me, and I said, and I wanted to know. I wanted to know why the conversation didn't go very well, and the person was feeling emotional. His Black friend was feeling emotional about it, and probably lashed out a little bit. And I said that was unfortunate, and I encouraged him to continue to reach out. I appreciate the fact that he picked up the phone and called me, and I let him know. I could tell he was hesitant in the way he would reference some things, and I would call him out on it. I won't call him by name, but I said, dude, you can say Black. You can, you don't have to hesitate before you say the word Black. Because it was like, if in daily conversation you were saying that to me, there's no reason why you can't say that now, right? In the context of the conversation we're having. But I could tell at the beginning of the conversation, he had some trepidation, but by the end of it, we were having an engaging conversation. So I think it was because I was open to having the dialogue with him, and so I can only speak for us on the receiving end as much, but be willing to step out of the comfort zone, and then for us on the receiving end, be willing to know it's not an easy thing to do, and have some empathy there. So
that's good. Thank you, Nickoria or Craig. Anything you'd like to add?
I would add to that. I've had about a half a dozen people reach out, everybody from high school friends to colleagues. And I'll tell you what they've all done that I've appreciated is, number one, they reached out, and I think to Richard's point, I think people know I'm pretty accessible, but they actually spoke about it in just human terms. They didn't speak about it in Black-white terms. It was just like, we saw somebody die on television, in a 9-minute video. Yes, he happened to be African American, and that's important, but the grief that they talked about, the feelings they talked about were very human feelings. And they didn't necessarily make it about color as much as they were just talking about like what is going on in this world and the tragicness of this. And I think that was a very real conversation. Yes, race did enter into it. But I think it also allowed us to kind of branch in, and I'll try and make this really quick because I know we're short of time. It allowed us to branch into, this is not an isolated event. This is connected to all these other things that are going on. If you think about COVID-19 and it's disproportionately affecting people of color because you can't social distance if you live in the hood, right? Or, people are homeschooled because of COVID-19, but you know what? If you are in a low-income property, you may not have Wi-Fi, which we all take for granted. So schooling your kids because you don't have broadband is a challenge. If you think about this pandemic and it was blamed on people who were Asian because it's the China pandemic, there are people being bullied around that have nothing to do with that. And, mask wearers versus non-mask wearers are now debating with one another. So it actually turned into a much broader conversation that just human to human, we could talk about the divisiveness that exists and make it not just about color, but make it about just how are we as humans able to tackle this together.
It's really good.
Yeah. And I'll add on, if you feel led to call somebody or to reach out to somebody, just do it, right? Pick up the phone, do the drive. I would say do the drive-by, even though that's not happening anymore. And you don't have to have a script when you call. Just call and say hello, and the conversation will go naturally. And know that if certain people's tensions are a little high, that's cool. Give them a couple of weeks, give them a month, but don't forget about them, and don't lose the passion that you have right now for understanding how they feel. Don't let that go. Continue the dialogue even past this this time where emotions might be high.
Okay, that's really great practical advice. Thank you all. Well, we're really right at the end of our time. I want to just again say what I said in the beginning. I'm so appreciative of you all sharing your time and, more importantly, your stories and your experience with us. I felt like you all did a great job of just authentic and real and helpful. And so, again, I want to say thanks from everyone at Credera, and we appreciate you all. Nickoria is with us all the time, but Richard and Craig, for you all to join us for today. Glad we get to know you through the forum thing, and really excited to stay connected to you. And again, just want to say thank you from everyone.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
everyone. Have a nice Friday afternoon. We'll talk to you later.